When Donald Kagan, Yale University Sterling Professor Emeritus of Classics and History, died precisely 5 years ago this month, he was 89 years old. Immediately, remembrances flowed in. Yale News recorded, quote, "From his first years at Yale, Kagan was heralded as a dynamic and influential teacher, a galvanizing presence whose lectures on ancient Greek history, delivered with eloquence, dry wit, and deadpan humor, filled classrooms to overflowing despite his strict grading policies," close quote. The New York Times claimed, quote, "Kagan's impassioned teaching style inspired generations of scholars, as well as Washington's strategists," close quote. And his friend, student, and now eminent scholar, Hillsdale Professor Paul Rahe mused, quote, "One of the chief downsides of getting older, I am now 72, is that one's friends die. On a Friday evening in early August near midnight, it was the turn of Donald Kagan, aged 89. I'm still having trouble accepting that he is gone," close quote. Professor Paul Rahe on the memory of eminent scholar, entrancing teacher, and dear friend Donald Kagan, now. My name is Todd Werner, and this is the Evangelization Culture Podcast from Word on Fire. Professor Paul A. Rahe holds the Charles O. Lee and Louise K. Lee Chair in the Western Heritage at Hillsdale College, where he is Professor of History. He's the author of Republics, Ancient and Modern, Classical Republicanism and the American Revolution, Against Throne and Altar, Machiavelli and Political Theory under the English Republic, Montesquieu and the Logic of Liberty, War, Soft Despotism, Democracy's Drift, and the 6 books on ancient Lacedaemon and its grand strategy, including most recently Sparta's First Attic War, Sparta's Second Attic War, Sparta's Sicilian Proxy War, and Sparta's Third Attic War. In 2019, the Mackinder Forum conferred on Sparta's First Attic War the Strategic Forecasting Book Award for Excellence in Geopolitical Analysis. On April 11, 2022, in recognition of his work on grand strategy, the University of Piraeus in Greece conferred on Professor Rahe its Themistocles Statesmanship Award. Paul, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be with you, especially given the subject.
Segment 1, the formation of Donald Kagan. Born in 1932 to a Jewish family in Kherson, Lithuania, Donald Kagan was brought to America by his recently widowed mother at the age of 2. They settled in Brownsville, a section of Brooklyn, New York. When asked years later what his life would have been like had he not left Lithuania in his early years, he answered, "Death. They killed all the Jews they could get their hands on." So, Paul, first of all, so pleased to have you here, an eminent scholar in your own right, but what a generous time to spend with us about your friend and mentor, Donald Kagan. Let's begin by asking about those gritty early years of Donald Kagan's youth. How did life in a heavily immigrant, working class New York neighborhood form the sensibility of Donald Kagan?
Well, it was not only that he lived in that neighborhood. Essentially, he was a working class kid. His mother worked in factories. He had a sister. I've never heard a word about the sister, but he was a product of New York City in what I would regard as its heyday. LaGuardia as mayor, and he was a real large D Democrat from very early on. Let me add, he never changed his party affiliation. Though he stopped voting in Democratic primaries and he would vote for Republicans increasingly. He went to high school there. He sang in the Brooklyn Opera as a kind of spear bearer, and had wonderful stories about that. He played football at Brooklyn in high school, and I think also at Brooklyn College. And one of the things that changed him, and I wish I remembered the name of the lady, but there was a woman who taught ancient history at Brooklyn College. And she taught it as a series of puzzles, which is to say, here's the evidence. The evidence is not fully coherent. The evidence is not fully reliable. What do we make of it? How do we
Yeah.
And in some sense, that's what he did the rest of his life. He tried to figure out what had happened on the basis of incomplete evidence. And this was not
Mm.
only true for his work in ancient Greek history. When he wrote a book on the origins of war, looking at not only the Peloponnesian War, but at the Second Punic War, and also at World War I, World War II, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was the same story, trying to make sense
Mm.
of incomplete information. I used to think when I was studying with him that working with Donald Kagan was the perfect preparation for being an analyst at the CIA.
Wow.
Because, we think we know what's going on right now. The truth is we don't. What we have is a
Yeah.
certain amount of information, a certain amount of disinformation, um, and puzzles. What are they really up to? What do they really want? What do these moves mean? So the skills that he developed himself, uh, but that he passed on to his students, were skills in trying to see behind the headlines, so to speak.
Mm.
Um, if back in the days when we had newspapers, if you were to read the New York Times, Don Kagan would say, "Who wrote the piece? What's the agenda of the person who wrote the piece? Does it come out in the
Yeah.
piece?" Um, the person who's giving the interview, um, uh, uh, the people who are providing information to the reporter, what's their
Right.
agenda? Um,
Right.
so, in other words, in some sense, Don Kagan taught you how to read a newspaper, read
Mm.
between the lines. Uh, and the other thing I'd say about him is he was born before World War II.
Mm-hmm.
He came of age, so to speak, during World War II. He was 12 in
Yeah.
1945. Uh, and for Jews, it was extremely important because they knew what Hitler was up to. They didn't know the full
Yep.
details until later, but they had a pretty good idea. So he followed it very closely. Uh, and a lot of what made the American university when I was a student, I started at Cornell in 1967, graduated from Yale in 1971, went to Oxford from 71 to 74 on a Rhodes Scholarship, came back to Yale, did a PhD with Don Kagan from 74 to
Mm-hmm.
77. Everybody I worked with grew up in the shadow of World War II or fought
Sure.
in World War II. So the consequence
Right.
is there was a certain realism, not in the technical social science sense, but these were people with feet on their ground. They weren't dreamers.
Mm.
They had seen how badly things could go wrong. Uh,
Right.
but second, they were patriots, and they were
Mm.
patriots because the United States performance in World War II was we saved an awful lot of people from a horrible fate. And they were nearly all Cold Warriors, not in the
Mm.
sense that they agreed with every policy of every president. Those were prudential matters. But when they
Mm-hmm.
were judging policies of presidents, they were judging them prudentially. The goal, defending the United States, our allies in Europe, our allies in Asia, that was a given. So the question is how
Mm.
best to do that. And those are always open questions. Uh,
Yeah.
you can be on the paper objectively right about your policy, and it can blow up in your face because there are
Mm-hmm.
contingencies.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
as Don would say, when you go to war, keep in mind the other side has a vote. Uh, so there was an appreciation for America and an appreciation for liberal education. And in his swan song, Awe Akwe Wale, that he gave when he retired at Yale, um, he poses the question: what's liberal education for?
Mm-hmm.
And what he emphasizes is citizenship, which is to
Mm-hmm.
say, in a liberal democracy, it is really important that the citizens be neither ignorant nor stupid, because they have a great deal of influence over the decisions that get made. And
Yeah.
so, a
Yeah.
lot of what you need to get in college, especially if you're going to an elite college where you're going to join the broader political class, those people who have more influence than other
Mm-hmm.
people, uh, what you need is an understanding of the world,
Yeah.
an understanding of philosophy, an understanding of history, uh, an understanding of literature, and enough of an
Mm-hmm.
understanding of science. So, um, as science progresses, you have some sense of what it means. You can
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
the consequences, or at least you can ask intelligent questions about the consequences.
Mm.
So, from his perspective, the 4-year undergraduate period was a period in which you studied the world,
Mm-hmm.
studied
Mm-hmm.
what angle of vision you should have on the world. In some sense, philosophy provides you
Mm.
with that. Study political theory, study history, study literature, and study philosophy. Now, and that was his view all along. In other words, what you see
Yeah.
in the Swan Song is Don Kagan. That's who he is. That's who he was. Um, when I first met him in the spring of 1968, a long time before he retired from Yale, um,
Yeah.
uh, that's what was being conveyed. This is why you do this. So you need
Mm.
information about the larger world, but also you need some training in reading between the lines, in weighing
Yeah.
evidence, in thinking hard about these cases. Now, one of the things he doesn't harp on in that talk, that I suspect if I'd been there, and I last wasn't. I mean, I live in the Midwest. Getting back to Yale is an expensive
Yeah.
and time-consuming proposition. He didn't, I think, harp enough on literature,
Mm.
because a liberal education not only prepares you for citizenship, it prepares you to be a friend, to be a lover,
Mm-hmm.
to be a
Yeah.
father, to be a mother, to
Mm-hmm.
make your way in the private world and the larger social world.
Mm.
And literature is extremely important in that. It gives you history gives you a kind of political experience of the past. Literature gives you a kind of personal and social experience of the
Mm-hmm.
interrelations between people. One can learn a great deal about love from the comedies and romances of William Shakespeare. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One can learn a fair amount about politics from Shakespeare's Roman plays, but also the plays about English kings. They're all about leadership,
Yes. Yes.
effective leadership, um, and and he knew that. He knew that.
Mm-hmm.
But he in that particular lecture he did not dwell on that. Um, when I was at Yale as a graduate student, there was a program called Directed Studies, which tells you nothing about the program. You
Hmm.
think it was aimed at freshmen and maybe sophomores, uh, and you had to apply to get into it coming into Yale. So it was the elite of the
Hmm.
elite. And what was it? It was a kind of boot camp in philosophy, in political theory, and in literature. And
Hmm.
the reading load was immense. Well, the thing was
Hmm.
about to go under. And the dean of Yale College asked Don Kagan, could you take this thing over and rework it? And he did. And in the very first class, the reworked directed studies curriculum, I taught. And it was absolutely wonderful. I mean, I
Wow.
taught then. I went back 20 years later as a visiting professor at Yale and taught it again. And it hadn't changed one bit.
Hmm.
So,
Wow.
if you think about it, what it is a 1 year liberal education. And
Yeah.
students who
Yeah.
did directed studies looked back on it when they were majors in one area or other as the most important thing they'd done at Yale College.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
so Don
I heard
Kagan was
Charlie
not
Hill. I heard.
just a teacher; he was an organizer of teaching. Uh,
Yeah. I
it's yes,
I was going to say, I heard Charlie Hill interviewed once, and they said, how did directed studies, which is effectively was, like you said, the celebration of Western civilization in a condensed form, literature, history, political philosophy, what have you. How he was asked, like, I think a couple before he passed away, Charlie Hill, professor at Yale, former diplomat, and he was also one of the three in the Grand Strategy series. You know this, but for audience members
yeah.
who do not, um, Charlie Hill said what saved directed studies was that it was called directed studies. That it wasn't necessarily on the chopping block, because many people didn't know who were from the outside world or whatever, didn't know what it was. So it sounds like it was an incredibly, something that taught you lifelong lessons. So I think, which is striking to have someone like Donald Kagan to say, yes, we need you to be a leader of this. And as you're saying, it was consequential as a result of his leadership.
It was both times I taught it. It was wonderful, and I
Yeah.
still know students that I taught as freshmen at Yale.
Wow.
I mean, one of them
Wow. Oh.
about 2 months ago, one of them who was a senior professor in Renaissance history came to visit me.
Mm,
And
mm.
as I said to him, I've been to all of your weddings. There were really only two, but uh, 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 but it was a memorable teaching experience, uh,
Yeah.
and it was a memorable experience for the people who took that course, and it still
Yeah.
exists. Um, and I think it's
That's wonderful.
pretty much unchanged. Now, in the current environment,
Paul.
I don't know how much longer it will exist. You have to understand,
Yeah.
I live in a time warp. I teach at Hillsdale College, and I was thinking as I reread Don's valedictory address, uh, he's describing our curriculum, um,
Mm,
and so I'm in a world in which it's funny. There was a friend of mine they were trying to hire him as a senior professor here. Wilfred McClay, Bill McClay, you may know him. You may have
sure.
interviewed him.
Yeah.
Um, and he said, "Okay, what can you tell me about the place?" And I said, "There's no one on the faculty I have contempt for." And he said, "That can't be true. That can't be true." Uh, and I said, "Look, they're not all of equal ability as scholars or as teachers, but they all
Mm,
work at the teaching and they care about the
yeah.
kids." And so,
Yeah.
I won't tell you about the person I thought was in my department the least effective teacher, uh,
Hmm.
because that would be unfair. But that person worked at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
was dedicated in that way. I cannot say anything moral in criticism, uh,
Yeah.
and so Don's view was this is a preparation for life as a
Yeah.
citizen, as a husband, a father, a mother, um, uh, a wife, um, and uh, and he was excited about it. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's funny. There's this description of him being a dynamic teacher. On paper, he wasn't.
Mm.
He would stand up in front of the class and talk, but there wasn't much ham. There was some in
Mm.
his lectures,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but what came through is enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And when I was a graduate
Yeah.
student there, he would be teaching 300 people in his basic Greek history course. It was something that
Mm-hmm.
Yale students understood you had to take. It was sort of fundamental to the experience of being at Yale College. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and you were right when you said his standards were high. We did not
Yeah.
give away grades. It uh, uh, the other thing I would say about him was he was an extremely warm man,
Hmm.
uh, and he was unpretentious. Uh, his ties were the worst ties I've ever seen on a campus. Uh, uh, he drove a car. I remember at one point somebody put on uh, put a sign on his car. It said "Perfect car for an ancient historian," meaning the car was an antiquity. I mean, they're you know he was still the Brooklyn boy, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and he loved football. Um,
Mm.
he loved baseball, and
Yeah.
he loved horse racing.
Mm.
And I don't know if this came across to you in any of the things you read, but he was at one point the director of athletics at Yale.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
They ran
Yeah. He
into
wore a lot of
trouble,
hats
and,
at
and,
Yale,
and
didn't
when
he?
they ran into trouble at Yale, they brought out
They went
Mister
to
Fix It.
Don.
Yeah, and so and his enthusiasm for sports was known because people saw him at the football games, uh,
Mm.
and uh, and he for 3 or 4 years he was the director of athletics. Um,
Wow.
dealing with budgets, getting everything lined up properly, hiring coaches, especially in areas where Yale had not done all that well. He chaired the
Yeah.
classics department a couple times, I think. He was
Mm-hmm.
dean of the college. Again, why'd they make him dean of the college?
Mm-hmm.
Because they were in trouble, and
Right.
and he was good humored. There weren't very many people who hated him. In other words, there wasn't a
Which
hard
is something.
edge. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was controversial, but I don't have this. I never had the sense that people in the faculty hated him. There might have been some envy, some
Yeah.
jealousy, all the human qualities.
Yeah. Of
Uh,
course. Of
but
course.
he was affable, genial, helpful. Um,
Mm.
he helped me no end. I mean, I got to know him at Cornell, and
Mm-hmm.
I I did everything at Cornell. I was one of these kids who arrived in freshman year. You join everything. You end up on the governing board of
Mm.
this, the governing board of that. And I wrote a column for the Cornell Daily Sun. And in 1969, there was an armed building seizure, And in the middle of this, I became associate editor of the Cornell Daily Sun, which means I laid out the editorial page every evening. Um, uh, and I drowned in the politics of the period. I mean, it's just, it was national news every day. And, the cover of Life magazine, big long articles in Time magazine, that kind of thing. And towards the end of that period, Don was leaving to go to Yale. And I called him up and I said, Don, I think I need to get out of here. If I stay next year, I'm going to be up to my neck in campus politics. Because the aftermath of this is just going to be a continuing thing. And he said, would you like to go to Yale? And I said, yeah. And he called me back 2 days later and he said, you're in. Now you have to apply. And that's really true.
That's so
that's
good.
The way it happened.
Even you went to
senior guy, and he called the dean, and he said, "There's a guy I want to rescue," and so I ended up at Yale. And when I applied to grad school, the bureaucracy lost my recommendations. I didn't know this, but Don Kagan was bird dogging it. And he found they weren't there. And he dug around and found them and got them in. I wouldn't have gotten in had he not done that.
Wow.
And then I get in, and I'm not given full money, a full ride. I'm given tuition. And he gives me a job as a TA, because what I'd been studying at Oxford prepared me to be a teaching assistant in Greek history. So sort of at every and then I thought I was going to be a German historian. And the fashion when I came back from Oxford was that you did social history. So everybody in German history was doing something like writing a dissertation on a labor union in the Weimar Republic, or on a corporation in the Weimar Republic. And I'd applied to law school and turned down law school to go to grad school. And I looked at that option and I thought, I'd rather be in law school than do that kind of history. And so I walked down the hall, knocked on the door at Don Kagan's office, and I said, suppose I wanted to do Greek history for my PhD. Would you take me? And he said, of course. So, there's this and when I did a dissertation with him, we got into an argument about how the Spartan ephors were chosen. And I was taking a position on this that was most unorthodox. And he said, you got to get that out of the dissertation. And I said, but I'm right. And we fought. And he finally said, okay, leave it in. Okay, a year later, I'm an assistant professor at Cornell. And at 11:30 p.m., I get a call. And it's Don Kagan on the line. And he says, you're right. And I said, of course I'm right, but what about? And he said, you're right about the Spartan ephors. So you didn't have to agree with him. You had to make an intelligent argument. And you could persuade him on a subject where he was firmly, attached to the thing. I'll tell you another story. I was a TA, and he did a course called Case Studies in the Origins of War. And I was the head TA. And he called me one morning and he said, can you go to the class to cancel it? I am under the weather. And I said, Don, if you want, I'll give the lecture myself. He said, "Can you do that?" And I said, "Sure, but I'm not going to tell them what you think. I'm going to tell them what I think." And he said,
Mm.
"What I think is in the book. Go ahead." So it was great fun. Here's his TA comes in, stands up in front of the class, and says, "Dr. Kagan's ill today. Asked me to give the lecture. I'm going to tell you why he's wrong."
Good one.
But he was always encouraging.
Yeah.
Uh, I won't tell you he was always right.
Yeah.
One of the things he told me not to do is to come to Hillsdale College. He
Mm.
said, "You'll never get out of there." Now, this is 20 years ago. So I was
Mm-hmm.
57. I'm 77 now. And he tells
Mm-hmm.
me, "Don't go there. You'll never get out." And I thought about it and thought about it. And I thought, I don't think I'm going to care whether I ever get out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. 20 years ago, American universities were in pretty good shape.
Mm.
In that 20 years, most of them have gone down the tubes. I mean, in the most remarkable way. Um,
Yeah.
uh, and it turned out my decision to go to Hillsdale College was the right decision. Um, every once in a while, someone interviews me about Hillsdale College. The New Yorker did a thing on Hillsdale. And I said, Williams College, 1955, with girls and black people. Uh, and that's pretty much what it is. It's the
Mm.
classical liberal education. It has always been open to women, and it has always been open to African Americans. It was a stop on the Underground Railroad. Um, and so
Mm.
I've had 20 years, 19, but this is the 20th, of pure joy here. And I would
Mm.
not have had 19 years of pure joy at Yale or Harvard or Princeton or anywhere else, really. Um,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
reason is it's not politicized here.
Yeah.
Um, it's um, the what do the people in English teach? Well, they teach Shakespeare, they teach Milton, they teach, and they're not grinding axes. Um, uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the people in history teach Ottoman history, or they teach the American Revolution, um, and they teach it the way it used to be taught, which is pretty much straight
Mm-hmm.
without too much editorializing. Uh, um, so it's as I said, he could be wrong, but he was
Yeah.
always thoughtful, always thoughtful. Uh,
Say, Paul. Paul. I want to ask you because so I'm going to back up for 1 second here. This is such a great survey of Kagan's life, and especially I love these stories. They're just so good and so personalized. I want to turn back for 1 second. Donald Kagan, when he became the first in his family to attend Brooklyn College. We're going to step back to Donald Kagan's formation for 1 second. First in his family to attend Brooklyn College, and one of my favorite stories, many people don't know, was told by Kagan on the influence of his classics professor, Meta Elizabeth Schutz. That's the name I think you were searching
yes,
for earlier.
okay,
Meta Elizabeth
that's the
Schutz.
woman that I
And
was.
as Kagan, yeah, yeah, yeah. And as Kagan recalls, he decided to pursue history at Brooklyn College by beginning at the beginning because he had a great, apparently at, I think it was Thomas Jefferson High School, he had a great history teacher. And he thought when he went to Brooklyn College, I understand he thought about maybe becoming a French teacher or then maybe considering being a lawyer. But ultimately, I think he landed on, I think I'll pursue history. Let's start at the beginning. I'll start with ancient history. And this is what Donald Kagan says this, quote, I went to the wise old heads among the students in the field and I said, what about that? And they said, no, ancient history is fine, but wait until you're a senior because maybe she will have retired. This remarkable, close quote, this remarkable woman, Donald Kagan continues, Professor Meta Elizabeth Schutz was her name, had this reputation of being an ogre, just a terrifying person. She was a maiden lady from Maine, and indeed she gave out the signals of a very hard-headed lady. I took her course, and I was overwhelmed by how serious she was about what she was doing. Part of it was to communicate to us the history, and part of it was to improve us as students, which she thought meant also as people. She didn't let anything go. She was as demanding of us both in terms of knowing what was in the books and in our expressing ourselves and the quality of our thought, close quote. Now, Paul, this story, I've told this story to my kids. I've told it to my students over and over again about how she would relentlessly ask questions and basically prove to these students at Brooklyn College, you guys think you're hot stuff. Well, let me tell you, you don't know anything. And she would demand precision in their answers. And Donald Kagan said, well, I'm not going to get caught flat-footed, and studied and studied and studied until when she called him, according to her, when she finally called on him, he said, I was going to have the most concise answer with the fewest words to get this answer right and show her I knew my stuff. She finally landed on him. Mr. Kagan, answer this, blah, blah, blah. Kagan answered, and she simply looked at him and said, yes, and moved on to the next person. And the way Donald Kagan tells it was he had won a great victory. He ended up taking all of her classes, and it was decisive for him with that teacher, with that challenge, to ultimately become a professor in the classics. Is that your understanding of the story? Would there be any amendments to
Yeah,
that, or what are your thoughts
yeah,
on that?
that's exactly right. I had forgotten her name, but I remember him
Yes.
talking about her in exactly that way. And look, that's what he became.
Yes.
I had the great advantage of having two spectacular teachers my freshman and sophomore years. I had Don Kagan and I had Alan Bloom.
It's amazing.
And I had them at the same time.
By the way, Alan Bloom, for those who don't know, Alan Bloom is the author of The Closing of the American Mind, among many things. But so those people who are unfamiliar. So I'm sorry, Paul, keep going.
I had a year-long seminar on Plato's Republic with Alan Bloom. This was at the beginning of the year. We were using mimeographs to read Plato's Republic, not Xeroxes because they didn't exist.
Wow.
And halfway through the year, his translation was published, and we got that. Kagan, it was all on Thucydides. So I had this experience sophomore year of year-long courses on very interesting books. I was asked recently, what did Bloom and Kagan do for you? And I said, they taught me how to read. Read carefully, read between the lines, compare one passage with another. What's this author up to? What's this author doing? And what is at the heart of this author's concerns? And yeah, no, I mean, Kagan was everything that his teacher at Brooklyn College had been. And he was what she had made him because she gave him a standard to live up to. And she loved her subject and he loved his subject. Now, there's another dimension to him that we haven't touched on. He was a political man. I don't mean he was, I don't mean if you took his Greek history course, you knew what his politics were. But I do mean he was a citizen. And he was interested in America, the trajectory of the United States after World War II. And then the trajectory of the United States after the Cold War. And so when he did this book on the origins of war, behind it is a meditation on the conduct of foreign policy. And, it came out of this course he taught. And in the beginning, when I was involved with the course, John Kennedy was his hero. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was the war that was avoided by skillful statesmanship. By the time he wrote the book, John Kennedy was a bit of a buffoon who had gotten us into a very great crisis. And that we got through it was dumb luck. So as new evidence became available, he would rethink things. And that's a wonderful example to show people that, I say to
Yeah.
my students,
Yeah.
the only proof you have a mind is you change it once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That means you're actually thinking and wrestling with things. And I press this on freshmen because, they arrive with a set of opinions that are pretty firmly enhanced. I mean, pretty firmly embedded in them. And
Right.
what I say to
Right.
them is, you have to be open to the possibility that you've been wrong all along. And
Good
so,
one.
let's say you end up thinking the same thing about a given subject after doing this reading and discussions in class. What happens then? Well, the answer is, why you hold that opinion.
Yeah.
You came in with an opinion, you examined the evidence for it, and came to the conclusion, yeah, I was taught the right way. Uh,
Yeah.
but there will be some things where you come in and you're going to change your mind.
Yeah.
Hillsdale College, where I teach, is the students are quite religious, and the school's about 30% Catholic and about 70% Protestant, and it was a Protestant school. Uh, there was a woman in my department who was the first Catholic on the faculty when I came here. And she's only been retired maybe 10 years. So it's, and the on Reformation Sunday, the questions Luther posed are put up, well, the students put it up on the door to the chapel. And during that week, there is a soccer game between Catholics and Protestants. And there's
The wars of religion are not quite done.
the Catholics always lose because they're outnumbered and the Protestants have got but in class, I've never been that interested in the Reformation, but I remember the first term I taught at Hillsdale College, when we got to the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, there were students who came alive in the most remarkable way. Well,
Wow.
the flip side of that is conversions. There are loads of conversions from Catholic to Protestant, though in recent years there hasn't been much of that. There's been Protestant to Catholic and Catholic to Orthodox. So there's a kind of intensity, intellectual intensity to the place that derives from the fact that there are serious issues these students are wrestling with. And more often than not, at the heart of it is religion. To some degree, that was true when I started college at Cornell and then transferred to Yale. My suspicion is religion plays a very small role at those schools. So one of the reasons liberal education is breaking down is the students don't think they have anything to learn. They are not caught up in issues that they want to get to the heart of and settle for themselves. And when I read about what's going on, it's as if the students want to teach the professors. So the whole thing has changed, and it's changed in a way. Let me go back to Don Kagan. Don Kagan was part of a generation, and I was too, though 15 years later, where life had a lot of weight. and it had a lot of weight because of World War II and the Cold War. Things could go very badly wrong, and everyone knew it. There was also a sense that what had happened in Italy and Germany and what had happened in Russia and elsewhere was tied up with a kind of crisis of the West.
Mm-hmm.
So there was something to study. And the thing to study was what went wrong and why in the 20th century did we end up in the pickle we were in.
Yeah.
World War I, if you think about
Yeah.
the Versailles Conference, was supposed to settle everything. There'd be no more wars. Democracy would be universal. Well, that's not the way it worked out. And when you're done with one problem, along comes another problem. And you could argue that that world disappeared in 1989, but it doesn't seem to have disappeared.
Yeah.
In other words, the same kind of madness seems to be with us again, both within this country and abroad. And it's as if the crisis is never ending. I don't think that question is being raised in a serious way at our major universities. It points to something. I'm not sure I ever had a conversation with Don about this. Look, the liberalism comes from the desire to prevent Protestants and Catholics from cutting one another's throats. So you separate church and state. You have a government of limited purpose, life, liberty, and property, or life, liberty, and the protecting the pursuit of happiness. And we agree that religion belongs in the private realm, and we agree to disagree about religious questions and to live alongside one another in peace. And that's an achievement of the American regime, and to some degree, it's our gift to Europe, because the example we set spread. And I would say nothing against that, except once you move religion out of the public sphere, there's an empty space in the public sphere, and something rather like religion moves in to occupy that space. I'm thinking of the Jacobins in the French Revolution. I'm thinking about socialism in the 19th century, fascism and communism in the 20th century, and what you might call progressivism in the 21st century. And the interesting side of that is everything I mentioned, the Jacobins, the socialists, the communists, the fascists, and the Nazis, persecuted the inherited religions, Christians and Jews in particular. And I think you're seeing that again today. I mean, there's an issue in the state of New York about whether a group of nuns founded by Nathaniel Hawthorne's daughter, taking no federal money, have to engage in euthanasia. And look, why would they do that? The answer is they want to rub these people's noses in it. And in their facility, they want there to be free love. They want to rub their noses in it. Earlier under Obama, there was an attempt to force a group of nuns to pay for abortion in their in their
Mm-hmm.
health
Mm-hmm.
insurance. And again, there's no reason to do that except to
Yeah. Yeah.
intimidate.
Exactly.
Uh, so the world that Donald Kagan grew up in, which was a world in
Mm-hmm.
crisis, uh, and the world I grew up in, it didn't go away in 1989. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that makes him worth paying attention to is he never thought in 1989 or afterwards that history was over,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
everything was going to be hunky dory, that Wilsonianism of the sort followed by the elder George Bush, Clinton, the younger George Bush, had solved these problems. Um,
Mm-hmm.
his view was it, these problems don't go away, and that Woodrow Wilson was a fool. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
in his account of the Versailles Conference and of Wilson, uh, Don is savage. He
Mm-hmm.
thought that Wilson had laid the foundations for World War II
Mm-hmm.
because he was hopelessly naive.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so uh, Kagan's worth reading. I wish someone would
Yeah.
collect, maybe one of his sons would collect his uncollected essays,
Yeah.
um, in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, on sort of contemporary issues,
Mm-hmm.
because he was always thoughtful,
Mm-hmm.
always thoughtful.
Mm-hmm. Segment 2: The Professor and the Scholar. In a new Criterion tribute to the late Donald Kagan, Professor Paul Rahe recalled, quote, "I first met Don in the spring of 1968. I was a freshman then at Cornell. He was teaching an introductory course in Roman history, as it happens for the very last time. I was enrolled in his class and assigned to his section. I was mesmerized. Don was an entertaining and provocative lecturer. He knew when and how to introduce the ham, and what he had to say was invariably interesting and informative," close quote. Paul, Yale News would elaborate further. Kagan's gift was narrative. He was a superb storyteller in just the same way that he could mesmerize friends with a recapitulation of the movie The Godfather or a crucial Yankees Red Sox game. He would captivate readers when writing about complicated battles of the Peloponnesian War. From his first years at Yale, Kagan was heralded as a dynamic and influential teacher, a galvanizing presence whose lectures on ancient Greek history, delivered with eloquence, dry wit, and deadpan humor, filled classrooms to overflowing despite his strict grading policies. The Socratic dialogue of his seminars made entry into one of them a winning lottery ticket for aspirants. He was capable of lecturing on the rise of the development of hoplite warfare in ancient Greece, as on the career of the Brooklyn Dodgers and the indispensable Jackie Robinson, close quote. Paul, you've done a wonderful job of outlining so much about Donald Kagan. What I do want to say also is, just so people know too, after he finished Brooklyn College, he got a master's degree in classics at Brown University. He got a PhD in history at Ohio State. And then he went on to teach at Ohio State, Penn State, and Cornell, where you met him before, as you said, he finished his career at Yale. So Paul, you've identified it a little bit. Tell us just a little bit more about Donald Kagan, the teacher, as you experienced him as teacher.
Well, his seminars were real seminars.
Mm-hmm.
He expected the people in the seminars to speak up. In other words,
Mm.
it wasn't a sort of mini lecture course.
Yeah.
Uh, and he would sort of make you take a stand, and then he would query it, or he would get someone else to query it.
Yeah.
In the lecture course, the main thing was irony
Mm.
and playfulness. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and it's odd. Look, Donald Kagan was not a handsome man. Uh, his head was a kind of block. He was not a great dresser. Uh, it was kind of appalling. But he would get up in front of the class and things would come alive. Uh,
Yeah.
and it was just plain fun. Uh,
Yeah.
and um, maybe all the more so because when you walked in the first day and took a look at him, you didn't think it was going to be like that at all. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, but you know, the other thing he did is he wrote rather well. Um,
Mm.
uh, his first major book, was called "The Outbreak of the Peloponnesian War." Uh,
Hmm.
I've written a book on the same subject, taking another stand, because this was, you know, the lecture I gave where I said, "Now Don Kagan's wrong, and I'm going to tell you why he's wrong." Was about that subject. But
Hmm.
that book is beautifully written, uh, and it teaches you how to go about thinking about these questions.
Mm. Mm.
Um, Even though I think he was mistaken, it's a book I sign because people can learn how to go about thinking about these questions from
Mm.
his example. And then he wrote three more books, all on the Peloponnesian War. Uh, the writing isn't quite as good. I think he really
Mm.
sweated blood over the writing in that first book,
Sure.
but they're excellent and thoughtful. And I mean, the only thing better than Don Kagan, well, other than my books, of course, but the only thing better than Don Kagan is Thucydides. Um,
Wow.
uh, and his books are, in a way, a kind of commentary on Thucydides, and they're meant as a correction of Thucydides in some measure, for whom he had infinite respect. So
Yeah.
uh, those four volumes have not gone out of print. First was published in 1969. Think about that. It's almost
Yeah.
60 years later, and it's
Wow.
still in print. And I think it will stay in print for a good long time. And you know, when it goes out of
Th-
print, it'll be
th-
print on demand. You know, in other words, you'll be able to get it, and people should get it. And
yeah.
I think
I
the
Paul,
go on.
Paul, I want to interject for I want to interject for 1 second because you're telling this very important story, and I wanted to give a little bit of background. So just again, as you said, Kagan was the author, and this is part of the whole story here. The type of a person he was, but the profound scholar he became. Again, from very humble background, he's the author of a dozen scholarly books. His topics range from Greek political thought to Pericles as statesman, from the origins of war to Thucydides as historian. His most famous work, which is what you're describing right now, was the unsurpassed four-volume series written over 17 years on the Peloponnesian War. And this is what essayist George Steiner noted as, quote, he said, the temptation to acclaim Kagan's four volumes as the foremost work of history produced in North America in this century is vivid, close quote. And Joseph Manning, the William K. and Marilyn M. Simpson Chair in History and Classics at Yale, remarked, quote, despite the vast mountain range of scholarship on Thucydides and the war that has been published since Kagan's four-volume study, it remains required reading by all historians, close quote. I've even seen references, and I don't know if this is hyperbole or where I found it, but they said that the work of Kagan on Thucydides was comparable to the work of Herodotus. It's so lionized, and an eminent scholar like you speaking so glowingly of this work, even to this day, 60 years later from its first volume, is incredible. And this is from a kid who kind of stumbled his way into Elizabeth Schutz's class. And instead of saying, this, I don't like this teacher, she's too hard, I dropped the class, he rose to the occasion, busted his hump, took every class she had, fell in love with the material, worked his tail off, learned how to be a great thinker, moved his way through education, moved his way through teaching, and became a lion of the field. So Paul, is it? Am I odd to think this is an incredible story, or am I? You were onto this first, but this is striking, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, no, no. To come from that background and go where he went. Now, there are other
Yeah,
people about whom this can be said. C. Van Woodward,
sure.
teaching at Yale when I was there. I
Mm,
got to know him quite well. Astonishing scholarship. And a terrific seminar leader and a terrible lecturer. Or
mm,
Gene Genovese. Gene Genovese was the godfather of my eldest child, Marxist.
mm,
Um, Roll Jordan Roll is a breathtaking book. Uh,
mm,
the subtitle is "The World the Slaves Made," uh, and it's an attempt to explore, given the fact that there aren't slave rebellions to speak of in the American South,
mhm,
was there resistance? And it's simply that opens up a world, and beautifully written. There was a
mm,
generation of people um, who were really really good. There's a guy at Cambridge now, Christopher Clark, who wrote a book on origins
mhm.
of World War One called The Sleepwalkers.
Yes,
Oh, what a read that
yes,
is! And I'm told he has a book on 1848, which I have not read, and I'm told that
yes.
it's equally good.
Mm,
Very often, these people come from just plain folks backgrounds.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
not, um, and at least if you go back 40 years, who were the people in the academy? They were people on the way up. They were
Mm,
very rarely from the class of the wealthy. There were exceptions to this,
mm,
but they were sort of Americans who went to public schools and got excited about history
yes,
or literature. Um,
yeah.
I at Yale, I took a course in which Yale was amazing in those days. We read every one of Shakespeare's plays in the course of a term.
Wow, wow.
Uh, uh,
Do they do
and
that? Do they do that anymore? I mean, is it?
I doubt it.
I was going
I
to ask you,
doubt
do
it.
they do that anymore? Because I've heard a lot of programs, for instance, in literature, read all the literary criticism, but they hardly touch the primary source. I don't know if that's an exaggeration, but do you have a sense about that?
Well, there was a drift that way. I'm not. I don't
Yeah,
know enough about that. There's a drift that way, but
yeah,
it was
yeah,
a wonderful
yeah.
course. And who was the guy who taught it? Uh, he'd been a bomber pilot in World War II in the Pacific. Uh,
Wow.
and had been shot down a couple times. I mean,
Mm,
um, he didn't come from a professorial background. Uh,
right,
it, it,
right.
or there was a fellow I got to know very well, Bernard Knox. Bernard was probably the greatest student of Greek tragedy in the 20th century.
Mm,
Uh, uh, does not come from a fancy background. Went to Cambridge, became a communist. He once showed me a photograph of a communist demonstration, and the guys with armbands were in charge of it, and the other three guys were the Cambridge spies. Um, Fought in the Spanish Civil War as a communist,
wow.
got invalided out. Uh, uh, he got a third at Cambridge. Came to the
Mm,
United States with his wife, whom he'd met at Cambridge, an American woman. Taught high school,
mm,
and then on the G, and then got involved with World War II. He was in the OSS with Charles Colby in a unit, 3-man unit. Stuart Alsop, Charles Colby, and Bernard Knox.
wow.
Uh, After the war, what does he do? Well, he takes the GI Bill and he goes to Yale to do a PhD in classics.
Hmm,
It's. I think the more you would dig into these people who were really prominent scholars,
yeah,
the more you would find a story,
yeah,
not
yeah.
unlike
Character.
Don Kagan's story.
Yeah, so true.
Uh, and um, uh, but he, uh, he worked and worked and worked at getting things right. That's why that
Mm.
4-volume series is so good and so stimulating and will have legs, will last.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean, these are books where where people are going to have to read them and say, is
Yep.
he really right? What about X? What about Y?
Yeah.
But they'll come back to them because he's so good.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think the book on the origins of war is a masterpiece.
Hmm.
Uh, again, I don't mean I think everything's right. I don't, but it's a wonderful teaching book.
Yeah.
I have used it in a class that I teach myself on that subject,
Hmm.
and it gets people stirred up,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it gets them curious, and it gets them thinking about asking. It gets them asking the right questions.
Yeah.
The great
Yeah.
thing about
Yeah.
Don Kagan is he knew what questions to ask, and he conveys that in his work. Uh,
You,
the and towards the end of his life, he wrote more popular books on Pericles. He wrote a single volume book on the Peloponnesian War, but he also he wrote a book on not disarming. You know, uh, he wrote it with Fred, his son, one of his two
mm-hmm.
sons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the name of it. Uh, but maybe it was called While America Sleeps.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was kind of the riff off of Kennedy's. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If you look at our situation today,
Mm.
where we're short of the weapons we need, um, boy, does it look like he was right.
Mm.
Uh, the They don't make them like him anymore.
Well, hey, Paul, I want to ask you this. Well, let me ask you this, Paul, before we go to our last segment. How did Donald Kagan convince us that ancient Greece matters to our 21st century world?
Well, I think he had an easy time
Mm.
because it does. Um, it's the place where you first get Republican politics.
Mm-hmm.
It's the place where you first get elaborate great power relationships.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first place where you get tragedy, philosophy, history.
Mm.
So there is a sense in which we're still living there.
Yeah.
We're living with Republican government. It's not quite the same as ancient Greek Republican government.
Mm-hmm.
We're living with great power controversies. We have tragedy. We have comedy. That's another thing that Greeks originated.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got history. We've got philosophy. In other words, the things he was in love with, liberal education, wouldn't have happened without the Greeks. They
Sure.
set the standard. And, the Romans wrestled with it. People in the Middle Ages wrestled with it. The 18th century wrestled with it. And the truth of the matter is, we're still wrestling with it.
Yeah.
Look, insofar as you can get an education at Yale or Harvard or Princeton or someplace like that, this is fundamental to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, it will die. Uh, uh, because I'd be interested to know whether students at Yale are hungry for red meat. I taught there as a visiting professor in teaching directed studies, but also teaching history. And I had done a book on the American Revolution, and
Mm-hmm.
so though I'm a Greek historian, I taught the American Revolution at Yale. And I had about 30 students in my class. And I showed up the next term for a seminar I was doing on the Scottish Enlightenment and American constitutional thinking. And there were 60 people wanting to take the seminar.
Wow.
In other words,
Wow.
there were a large number of students hungry for red meat.
Yeah, yeah.
They wanted to read the real stuff and wrestle with the real
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
And I had to throw 40 of those students out. You
Wow.
can't teach a seminar with 60
Yeah,
students.
of course, of course.
So then, this is 1996, 97. I wonder today, maybe it is still alive. It'd be, the test would be directed studies.
Yeah,
Has it been
yeah.
dumbed down? And do they still get the very best students?
Hi, I'm Todd Warner, managing editor of Evangelization Culture, the journal of the Word on Fire Institute. Word on Fire is a global evangelical community that exists to provide our members with the resources they need to proclaim Christ to a secular culture. Our award-winning quarterly journal, Evangelization Culture, is offered exclusively to Word on Fire Institute members. It's a tangible representation of our mission and goal to lead with beauty in order to bring others to the knowledge of truth. Inside each issue, you'll find writing from premier scholars and inspiring pieces on literature, culture, and daily life from fellow missionaries on the journey to know and serve Christ. Get a copy of the current issue of the Evangelization Culture Journal for free by visiting wordonfire.org/journal. Thank you, and join us in bringing Christ to a hungry culture. Segment 3, Defender of Liberal Education. In his valedictory address at the end of 44 years teaching at Yale, Donald Kagan gave a thundering defense of liberal education as it once was and still ought to be. However, defining liberal education was the first and most urgent matter. He insisted, quote, "From the beginning, the champions of liberal education have thought of it as seeking at least four kinds of goals. One was an end in itself, or at least as a way of achieving that contemplative life that Aristotle thought was the greatest happiness. A second was as a means of shaping the character, the style, the taste of a person to make him good and better able to fit in well with and take his place in the society of others like him. A third was to prepare him for a useful career in the world, one appropriate to his status as a free man, and the fourth was to contribute to the individual citizen's freedom in ancient society. Servants were ignorant and parochial, so freemen must be learned and cosmopolitan. Servants were ruled by others, so freemen must take part in their own government. Servants specialized to become competent at some specific and limited tasks, so free men must know something of everything and understand general principles without yielding to the narrowness of expertise, close quote. So, Paul, do you agree with Donald Kagan's definition of liberal education? And you already are musing on, you did a great segue right into this segment. What has become of liberal education in the modern university to your way of understanding?
Well, yes, I do agree with him. And I think those four purposes are still there.
Mm.
And he emphasized the fourth, citizenship.
Yeah.
I think that's a reasonable thing to emphasize because we absolutely have to have, especially on the part of those people who play a more prominent role in public affairs, we have to have people who have some understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to have people who not only have the kind of understanding you would gain in college, but look, the point of a college education is not that you completed your education, you've just begun it. In other words, the ideal graduate of, say, Hillsdale College, or the ideal graduate of Yale in my day, was someone who went on and read widely and thought about things and kept up with things. Um, uh, and that's needed more than ever, especially since we don't have newspapers anymore.
Yeah.
In other words, there really is no one watching our rulers. I can't tell you what's going on in Michigan state government. There's nobody who covers it. Not well.
Yeah.
The newspapers in Detroit, which once did that sort of thing, they published 3 times a week.
Hmm.
Uh, so everything happens in the dark.
Yeah.
Uh, and uh, newspapers used to be a way of continuing your education because you could follow what was going on in the world.
Yeah.
And you could continue reading novels and you could continue reading history. And you could uh, continue reading philosophy at some level.
Mm-hmm.
So college was meant to be the beginning, not the end.
Yeah.
And uh, I'm not sure that that word exists much anymore.
Paul, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, and this is another thing that is interesting. So, first of all, I want to highlight a story that Charlie Hill. Charlie Hill, I think you might remember him, or maybe you worked with him. The seasoned
Oh
diplomat,
yeah.
Yale professor.
Oh, I
Yeah,
knew Charlie Hill,
Yeah. So he was the. For those who don't know,
and I know his
he wrote
widow.
a.
I mean,
So he was a seasoned diplomat and also a Yale professor of grand strategy. He warned students in the modern university were remaining fundamentally unformed. And this is his quote. He said, "We've changed our education in the last 30 or 40 years so that students are really not being taught history. They are not being taught what it was that got us here. History gave way to being taught issues. And issues are something abstract. They're just out there. They just somehow show up. That is the fundamental reason why we have this seeming obliviousness or ignorance about the way the world has got to be managed in order to make everything else work well. If we don't know that, then it's all going to fall apart," close quote. Now, Charlie Hill advocated for broad liberal education, especially in history and literature. He wrote that great book, Grand Strategies. And to do this would make students broader thinkers who would discern the import of context and not simply artificially circumscribed issues. Are you in agreement with what Charlie Hill said? It sounds like you are, but would you say a word or two about that?
yeah, yeah. By the way, he's a good friend of Don Kagan's
I just I
during Kagan's
he
later
introduced
years.
I think he introduced him. I think at his swan song or what one of the speeches he gave as valedictory. I think Charlie Hill was the one that introduced him, if I'm not mistaken.
That could easily be.
Yeah,
That could easily be.
yeah,
And Charlie's wife taught in directed studies when I was teaching in it, and I think Charlie ended up teaching directed studies.
yeah.
Um, and just loved it.
Hmm.
And look, he was a diplomat. Think about the perspective of diplomats. What do you need to be a good diplomat? You have to know the world.
Mm.
You have to have a sense of different cultures and how they operate. Um, you have to have a sense of different political regimes and what they aim at. How do you get this?
Yeah,
The answer is history. There's no other way of doing it. Um, uh, and Charlie knew that. I think he went to Sewanee, University of the South. I'm pretty sure he did. Uh, and in those days, you got that kind of education at
yeah,
Sewanee.
yeah,
The truth of the matter is, when I went off to college, you would get that sort of education just about anywhere you went. And now it's not really available.
yeah,
And there is a sense, at least among quite a few students, that they don't have anything to learn in college.
mm,
They're there to judge the professors, they're not there to be judged.
yeah,
Uh, I think it would be a nightmare to be teaching at Harvard right now.
mm,
It, I mean, there are ways you could handle it. Basically, take no prisoners.
mm,
Uh,
yeah,
just be yourself and do it, and not care what people think. And probably you would attract students because surely there are people at Harvard who want an education.
yeah, yeah,
And, you know, it they'll go where it's on offer.
Yeah. Say, Paul, let me ask you this. How could someone like Donald Kagan simultaneously be such a specialist in the Peloponnesian War and yet such a generalist about human nature? And it seems so essential that you can, to be an expert, you almost need to be as good of a generalist as you are of an expert, so that your expertise doesn't get somehow warped by being so tightly in a silo. And so his dynamic tension between his specialty and his generality, if you will. And our universities, are they making thinkers like Donald Kagan anymore? Or are our best universities basically putting people in silos, disdaining the general view, or the formation what the general view does for you, and they're just satisfied to say that's your silo, that's your silo, that's your silo? What's your sense about that?
I think the question is a good question, and I think the fashion, the direction things are drifting, and has been for quite some time,
Hmm.
is everyone who comes out of graduate school wants to be a research professor and focus narrowly on their own field.
Mm-hmm.
The trouble with that is if you know only your own field, you don't really know your own field,
Right.
because thinking is comparative.
Yep.
I mean, it's the way you understand your field is you bring something to it. You look at the evidence in your field and you judge it, and you judge it in light of a more general knowledge. Look,
Yes.
Kagan did this course on the origins of war and then a book on the origins of war. And the whole point of it was comparative. I'll give you an example. Peloponnesian War and World War One went together because in both the Peloponnesian War and World War One, the major powers got dragged into a conflict because of problems with an ally.
Mm.
And so the question is, who's the horse and who's the rider?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is Corinth driving things, and is Austria-Hungary driving things? So um, they're worth comparing because similar questions have to be asked, and one can throw light on the other. The second pair was a Second Punic War and Second World War.
Mm.
What they had in common was a failed peace.
Mm.
Peace at the end of the First Punic War did not settle things. The peace at the Congress of Versailles did not settle things.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
in a way, the question in the second half was, what is a good peace?
Yeah.
What is a peace that settles things so you're unlikely to get a war again anytime soon? I'll
Mm.
give you an example of such a peace. The peace that came out of the Congress of Vienna. There
Yeah.
isn't a major war in Europe between 1815 and 1914.
Yeah.
There are wars: unification of Germany, unification of
Right.
Italy. Russia is trying to take Crimea. There are things, but they're all circumscribed, and they don't draw in all the powers.
Mm.
Uh, so the question is, why were they successful in 1815, and why did they fail in 1918? So you don't even know what questions to ask,
Mm-hmm.
uh, unless you have a general knowledge of other situations that might be similar. And
Yes.
I say might be similar because they're probably similar in some ways and dissimilar in other ways.
Yeah.
But the comparison is always fruitful.
Yeah.
And Don knew that.
Mm.
Uh, uh, I mean, look, if you wanted, if I were to take that book of his and rewrite it, there would be a third failed peace, and it's called the settlement at the end of the Cold War.
Mm.
Why did that fail? The only way that you can come to understand why the settlement at the end of the Cold War turned out to be a bust is by looking at comparative situations,
Mm.
at settlements that worked and settlements that didn't work.
Yeah.
Uh, so, I watched this. I taught at University of Tulsa for 24 years, and we were a small department, and we needed people who would teach outside their narrow specialty.
Mm-hmm.
And the younger people that we were hiring in the 1990s, they really resisted teaching outside their specialties.
Hmm.
Well, if there's nobody there who teaches outside of his or her specialty, the students only get the specialties.
Exactly.
And if you have a department of 8 people, that's not very much.
Yep.
So the large survey course is terribly important for educating young people.
Yes.
I would go so far as to say the large survey course is very important for educating professors.
Yeah. Yeah.
Donald Kagan taught Western civilization at Cornell. That's a course I didn't take, but he did it for years. He traded off doing that course with some other people in that department. Did he learn anything from teaching that? Oh my gosh, of course he did.
Yeah.
Learned an enormous amount. Did the students learn from this large course? Yes. Because comparative situations were pointed out to them.
Yeah.
So learning how to think it's all about seeing an example and wondering, does it apply today?
Yeah.
And if so, how? And if not, how not? And of course, it nearly always applies, and it also nearly always does not apply. Which is to say, you've got to actually think. At University of Tulsa, I had to taught a broad swath of courses. I never once regretted that. And in fact, I profited from it because I ended up doing a lot of scholarship in the 18th century and, the Montesquieu and Rousseau and the American Revolution. I wouldn't have done that had I not been sort of thrust into getting to know periods other than my own period.
I was going to say what strikes me about this is so I practice internal medicine, so I'm a generalist in the practice of medicine, and I have many good friends and colleagues who are specialists that we worked well together. But part of my job is to survey the entire situation, to understand the depths of each of the areas of the body and so on. But I need to know everything and how it works together in concert. And it strikes me that if one is only siloed in various areas of expertise, again, it warps your ability to fully understand context, the relationality of things. And furthermore, the more you see and the broader nature by which you see it, it develops, it forms intuition. It helps to refine your gestalt. It gives you that, if you will, spidey sense, the sensibility that comes just from seeing a lot of things, like you said, comparing things and saying, this is an apt comparison, this is not an apt comparison. And it helps you to cultivate a nose for going forward. And if all you do is see isolated puzzle pieces and never looking at the entirety of the puzzle itself, you never get to look at the box of the puzzle as you're putting these things together. I don't know. I just think there's a stunting. And to my way of thinking, the best college educations are forming you to be a better thinker and to be a hungry thinker for the rest of your life. And I think that's what Donald Kagan represented. That's what you're representing. And that's a little bit of the laments about the modern state of liberal education. I wanted to go into the next question, which is, so the success of the scientific method in the natural sciences led to an enthusiasm to apply it to the social sciences. And again, in the Swan Song speech at Yale, Donald Kagan asked, quote, hasn't the scientific method made its way into other disciplines, and can't its benefits be obtained through them? Where the attempt has been made most seriously in the social sciences, it has been a failure. It is increasingly obvious that trying to deal with human beings, creatures of independent will and purpose, as if they were objects like atoms, molecules, cells, and tissues, produces unsatisfactory results. The fundamental idea of the whole enterprise, the attempt to remove values from the consideration of human behavior and simply to apply the scientific method, now seems most implausible. Close quote. Or, as Thomas Sowell once observed, people are not, quote, inert blocks of wood to be moved about like pieces on a chessboard to carry out some grand design from on high, close quote. So on the notion of what we're just describing about the generalist versus the specialist, we need both. But every one of us, even if we're a specialist, we need to cultivate that generalist within ourselves so we don't get warped in the way we think. Paul, what has become of our conception of man that we believe we can unerringly subject him to a method and find pat answers as simply as a chemical equation or a mathematical problem? What's gone wrong with our thinking in this respect?
Well, it's absurd. And it leads us into making terrible blunders.
Yeah.
Let me take two examples: idealism and realism. Okay. Idealism. Woodrow Wilson, inspired by Immanuel Kant, the essay on perpetual peace.
Yep.
The notion is we can abolish war. All we have to do is to make every country a democracy, every country have freedom of the press, have more or less free trade, and have a United Nations. And it'll work. And of course, it doesn't work because countries are not the same. They have different histories, different cultures, different obsessions. I mean, it's not entirely stupid. The European Union is based on this notion. But, you know, for the European Union to work, we had to level Germany. You know, if you look at photographs of Gaza today, and you look at photographs of Berlin in 1945, it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
When the Allies wanted to meet in Russia at the end of World War II, to meet in Berlin, and if they were interested in symbolic value of Berlin, because it meant victory and it advertised victory. There wasn't a single building in Berlin standing that was adequate for the meeting. So they met in Potsdam in the hunting lodge of the Crown Prince. I've been to the hunting lodge. Churchill's daughter, youngest child, was a good friend of mine, and she came for International Churchill Society tour. She wrote me and said, "You're in Berlin at the American Academy. Why don't you come join me?" So I did.
Wow.
We have a larger student center than this hunting lodge. It was nothing. There was nothing standing. To force everybody into the same pattern didn't work. And the Germans were willing to be forced into that pattern after World War II because of all they'd suffered. And the French similarly. And there isn't much trouble between Germany and France. But Russia, China, Iran, no, it can't be universal. And the attempt to make it universal means you have stupid policy that blows up on you and can cost many, many lives. The same thing's true with realism. The realists say every state wants the same thing: maximization of power. So they ignore differences between cultures, between peoples, between regimes, and they try to plot things out almost with a computer program, and they make the same mistakes as their idealist enemies make, which is one size fits all.
Right.
That's the danger from taking physics as the model for social science.
Good one.
So let me turn it around. What would What should someone studying national security study? Historical examples,
Yeah.
getting a sense of the variety of things. It's not all the same. Now, there is something that all political communities have in common. Each one of them wants to survive.
Yeah.
But each one of them wants something else beyond
Mm-hmm.
survival.
Mm-hmm.
And if you pay attention to one and you don't pay attention to the other, you're not going to know what's going on.
Yeah.
The other thing that Don touches on is we're teaching college students to think of human beings as, to quote Tom Sowell, blocks of wood,
Mm-hmm.
which is to say, we're teaching them not to have respect for other human beings
Yeah.
and not to have respect for themselves, which is to say, a liberal education exposes students to the fact that they have choices to make, that they really do have choices.
Yeah.
And they can make good ones and they can make bad ones. And what counts as a good one is in part a reflection of universal principles and in part a reflection of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, there's always a prudential element
Yes.
To human choice making.
Yeah.
And indeed, there's always a prudential element to morals.
Yeah.
We are not called upon to behave suicidally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so thinking about what's right and wrong always involves asking what's right and wrong in this situation.
Yep. Yep.
Generally, this is right. Thou shalt not kill.
Mm-hmm.
But if armed marauders are coming in your front door, you that does not apply.
Right.
So thinking involves the notion that there are decisions to be made and they can't be made scientifically. Science may inform the decision. You might, consequence of doing this, you might get this impact. But science can't, there's no science of prudence.
Yeah. This is so, this is so important because at the end of the day, this is wisdom that is arrived at through the difficulty of studying, listening, learning from experience, making mistakes, recovering from mistakes, recognizing that there are not sometimes there's a pat answer, but rarely do you come at the right answer without taking into consideration all that you've mentioned about chance, contingency. You're delving into uncertainty. And again, that the old saying of Mark Twain that history seldom repeats itself, but it often rhymes. This is the hard work of becoming educated. And I think sometimes the ideological approaches or the realist approaches or the idealistic approaches, like you just mentioned, they're giving you a prescription that's a boxy way of thinking because it's easier that way. We can just lump people in here. We can assume that's the way they are. And here it is. It's a construct. It's a program. It's an algorithm. Go for it. Run with it. And well, is it any question that the algorithm goes wrong? Now, that doesn't mean that when we deviate from the algorithm that we always get it right. And the algorithm doesn't have a role for providing us some sort of a framework to think. But at the same time, it's to your point, we get lazy when we rely on it. We stop thinking, we stop studying, and we say, this is working. Why is reality not conforming to my theory here? And it's this entire conversation surrounding Donald Kagan and the way he arrived at the wisdom he arrived at, you and the work you've done and the wisdom you've arrived at. It's difficult. It's hard. And that's what formation and education are all about. So that's why I really appreciate this conversation. Paul, I wanted to finish with two questions to finish with. First of all, in an age obsessed with pragmatism and utilitarianism, is there still room to believe that a liberal education is indispensable to man and woman's arrival at virtue?
Oh, sure.
Hmm.
I mean, look, in an age of pragmatism and utilitarianism, uh, we're nothing but appetite.
Yeah.
And we aren't simply appetite. Ask anyone who has children. Uh, it's uh, or anyone who's married. Uh, One of the things I like to say is there's sort of two ways of dealing with other people: negotiation and deliberation.
Hmm.
We do a lot of negotiating. You sell your house, there's a little negotiating about the price. Um, uh, but in a marriage, the minimum you want negotiation to be minimal and deliberation to be maximal.
Hmm.
What does that mean exactly? Well, you need a common good that you
Yeah.
both care about. Okay, in the ordinary marriage, that's called children.
Hmm.
And here's the thing about children: they're changing constantly.
Yeah.
So what is right today is wrong tomorrow. And parents are amateurs. That is to say, they're doing it because they love it, not because they're professionals.
Hmm.
They're not experts.
Yeah.
So it's all prudential. I mean, and it's prudence informed by moral principles, but the prudence never disappears, and you have to you have to do that. I used to teach a course at the University of Tulsa, in which I would get engineers. Maybe 10% of the kids in the class. And I would ask on the first day, how many of you are engineers? Hands would go up. And I said, some of you may think, why do I have to take this class? Why do I have to take a literature class?
Yeah.
And I would say, well, I've heard tell that engineers sometimes get married. I don't know whether that's true, but if it is true, there's nothing taught in the engineering school that's going to help you in your marriage. Uh, uh, and the study of literature and history might. Uh, uh, and because I had students, who would come to me, why am I in this course? Why do I have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
this course?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and the um, and then the other thing I said is, okay, you're going to be an engineer. To make real money, you got to get into management.
Yeah.
That means you got to deal with people. Tell me what they teach in the engineering school that will help you deal with people. Zip. You know, they teach an expertise. It's very important, that expertise,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's not adequate. So it's uh, and you need a liberal education. Did these engineers get a liberal education? Mostly not.
Hmm.
Very minimal number of courses that they were required to take outside of the engineering school.
Yeah.
Some of them got excited. The
Mm.
very best student I ever had was in a Thucydides seminar. He was an engineer.
Wow.
Um, and when I went to his wedding, and later he went off to I don't know, one of the big engineering companies, and they sent him to graduate school. I think he did an MBA.
Mm.
And that is indicative of where he was going and the thing. I've lost touch with him, but
Mm.
he was absolutely terrific. Um, I used to get postcards when he went to Greece or somewhere like that.
Mm. Mm.
Uh,
But this is,
it's
yeah, yeah. I teach when I teach my medical students and residents. I teach them a lot. Obviously, diabetes and heart failure and pneumonias and coronary disease and so on. But I also have them, read an excerpt from Dostoevsky. They're familiar with Chesterton. They're learning Rainer Maria Rilke. Because I say, look, if you're going to be a good doctor, and my audience has probably heard me say this before, if you're going to be a good doctor, you need to know the human body. If you're going to be a great doctor, you need to be as good of a student of human nature as you are of the human body. And to your point exactly, and I love what you said about the engineers and what they're going to learn about marriage from engineering. The bottom line is, you need to read Anna Karenina. You need to read the Brothers Karamazov. You need to read Hamlet. You need to read Pride and Prejudice if you want to have some facility or greater facility with the very human situations that are going to walk into your exam room that are going to transcend their medical complaint. And if you don't do that, you're going to be a little bit of a shell of what you could be. So I could not agree with you more.
Well, dealing with the body is sort of like repairing cars. The difference is the body can speak to you.
That's right.
The body feels pain. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I have a cousin who cancer researcher at NIH, a guy named Marston Linehan. Sort of a big deal. He was an English major.
I love it.
And he did his pre-med courses in the summer.
Love it.
It's
the way it ought to be. It ought to be that way, you know. Yeah. Well, Paul, you've been so generous with your time. I got one final question, and we're going to bring you back on, and we're going to talk about some of your own work. But you've been so generous to be commemorating such a wonderful professor and mentor and friend of yours. So, Paul, Donald Kagan wrote, quote, "A liberal education prized sociability above the solitude of hard study. It took a dim view of solitary study aimed at acquiring knowledge for its own sake, which was called pedantry, a terrible term of abuse at the time. Pedants were thought to be fussy, self-absorbed, engaged in the study of knowledge that was useless," close quote. So Donald Kagan was a man of great sociability, a family man, a dear friend, and a devoted mentor, and he touched the lives of many. As Jay Nordlinger concluded his remembrance, quote, "It was so great to hear Donald Kagan talk and hear him laugh. Wonderful laugh, frequent laughs. To be in his company was a joy and an education," close quote. And finally, Paul, finishing your warm tribute to your late mentor, you wrote, quote, "40 years ago when my father died, my mother told me, 'You will not know the meaning of the word loneliness until both of your parents are gone.' Perhaps because I was on the verge of marrying a wonderful woman when my mother died, I did not feel great loneliness then, but I do so now. For more than half a century, I had in Don Kagan a surrogate father. I doubt I will see this again," close quote. Paul, you maybe have said it all through the entirety of our conversation, but if you could sum it up, what has Donald Kagan meant to you, and how would your life and career have been different without him?
I wouldn't have gone to Yale. Probably wouldn't have gone to Oxford. Wouldn't have become an ancient historian. Mm-hmm. He changed my life. He also taught me prudence. And I'm very good at prudence. I have a capacity to shoot myself in the foot. But he is the example of a guy who, in an environment where it's not a friendly environment, can make his way successfully. Yeah. And just a wonderful human being. Yeah. Taught me to be a man. How about that?
Wonderful. In a 2012 interview, Donald Kagan beamed, "I have led such a lucky, charmed life that I feel like every day is the best day of my life. May God rest his soul." Professor Paul Rahe, professor, scholar, and apprentice and friend to the late, great Professor Donald Kagan, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Wonderful. Take care.
So I've been thinking, as you might have guessed, one of my favorite stories about Donald Kagan was his experience with Brooklyn College's classics professor, Meta Elizabeth Schutz. One of the great counterfactuals of both Donald Kagan's life and the life of classics scholarship is the question, What if Donald Kagan decided not to take Professor Schutz's class? What if he simply bowed to the advice of the upperclassmen who warned, it's too hard, it's not worth the hassle? Kagan's life, his scholarship on Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War, and the lives and careers of countless students and colleagues would have been very different. But instead, Donald Kagan decided to take a risk. When I talk to my daughters, I routinely advise them to take good risks. Don't be afraid of trial, of obstacles, of the possibility of failure. Instead, run headlong into challenges with faith, hard work, passion, and a plan for success. And revel in it. As Winston Churchill once quipped, I like a man who grins when he fights. Donald Kagan grinned when he fought. Professor Schutz challenged Donald Kagan. She angered him, motivated him, and in the end, formed him. Part of Donald Kagan feared her. Part of him resented her. But in the end, nearly all of him loved her because she brought him in her own cantankerous way to new heights. A sculptor of sorts, she refused to leave him as unchiseled marble. And with his cooperation, together they created a masterpiece. What would happen if we embraced risk? What would happen if we routinely decided to set fear aside, embrace the passion to learn, grapple with the work ahead, and believe, truly trust that we will succeed? What would happen if we saw the difficult experiences and challenging mentors not as something we want, but as something we need? Perhaps, like Donald Kagan, we too would fully flower into who we are called to be. May God rest the soul of the late, great Donald Kagan, and may God bless the soul of the Professor Schutzes who made him. And one last thing. Take some time to read the obituaries of Donald Kagan. Embrace the life he led from its humble beginnings to its soaring end, life of joy and trial, of risk and reward. But also dive a little into one of his works on the Peloponnesian War, or on Pericles, or on the origins of war. Read good but approachable scholarship that is born out of passion, intelligence, and a willingness to take an honest risk. Thank you once again for joining me on the Evangelization Culture Podcast. I'm Todd Warner, and until we meet again, keep bringing Christ to a hungry culture.